Welcome to Retail Crime Uncovered, the go-to podcast for anything and everything retail crime related. I'm your host, Professor Emmeline Taylor.
My next guest is Jamie Barnes. He's the manager at Fresh Start Future Enterprises. Jamie, welcome. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Not too bad.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about Fresh Start. How did that organisation come about?
So, organisation was started by the owner of a sign company in Norwich. She was employing offenders out who were coming out on temporary release from an open prison. And those guys that were working for the sign company and herself noticed that a lot of the guys that were coming out of the open prison needed support in other areas, not just for employment. So they kind of thought, right, how can we help with that? So they started the process of setting up Fresh Start. They put all the paperwork in to set it up as a registered charity, started looking at the processes and the governance that needed to be in place to kind of set the charity up to begin with. I started working for them voluntary when I was in custody. I was at the open prison myself and I started to volunteer here. I got out of prison myself January 2021 and started working here again at Fresh Start in February. And it's kind of just grown and grown massively. Even through COVID, we've still kind of grown as an organisation and supported so many people to make positive changes in their lives. So
wow, that's fantastic.
Amazing journey.
Yeah, I'm aware that is such a challenging time when people are released from prison. Quite often they don't have stable accommodation, they don't have employment, perhaps don't even have a bank account, so they can't access benefits, for example. What sort of individuals are you working with? What's the sort of typical profile of somebody who would work with your organisation?
It's quite varied, to be honest, but generally it's prison releases. So we have a lot of guys that are coming out of custody where, you know, because we offer full wraparound support, so we meet at the gate, we take them to their job centre appointments, so they've got their benefits sorted out. We take them to their first probation appointment, so we're kind of advocating for them through that initial first probation appointment. You know, if we'd worked with them pre-release as well, we'd be looking at housing referrals, mental health, and making sure that they're getting that mental health support. So I suppose it's those prolific offenders are the most of our clients, those kind of revolving door individuals, you know, issues with drugs and alcohol. So they're the kind of stereotypical client that we have, but we do have a mixture of clients, really, because we do support people that haven't been to prison as well. We support people at an earlier stage in the criminal justice. So, you know, if we can prevent people going into prison in the first instance, then that's all the better, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That sort of diversion from prison, because we know all too well, once you have served a prison sentence, the likelihood of then going back in, as you say, the revolving door is spinning quite fast for some individuals. So you mentioned yourself, you've spent time in prison. What happened? What was your story? How did you begin first committing offences? What was happening in your life at the time?
So I come from a broken home. So it was just my mum. So single parent. She was working a lot. So I was kind of left to my own devices, really, at a very young age, kind of 7, 8 years old. So I'd be hanging around with the wrong crowd in my local area. And then I'd start getting involved in kind of shoplifting, criminal damage, just to kind of fit in with those people. So I think first shoplifting offence was probably kind of like 8, 9 years old. That's kind of how that kind of started, that criminality started. It kind of progressed from that as I got older in my late teens. You know, drug use went from cannabis to kind of cocaine, and then it kind of introduced to heroin and crack, and that's when it kind of snowballed out of control, really. First prison sentence was when I was 18, and then, as you said, it's that revolving door. And from 1998 to 2012, which is quite a big chunk of my life. I was in and out of custody quite a few times in that time.
Gosh, that's 14 years of in and out of prison. And do you attribute that then to having a drug addiction? Is that the reason for your offending at that point?
Yeah. Obviously, the earlier part of my offending, I put that down to kind of like being childish, wrong crowd, being led down the wrong kind of path, wanting to please people. But then once the addiction kind of started, then that was all about, supporting that drug addiction, really.
Definitely. It was there. I mean, so just going back to, you're 8 years old, you've just committed your first shoplifting offence. You've got a relatively unstable sort of family background.
Yeah.
Was there any intervention at that point? Did anybody reach out to you was there any consequences to that behaviour?
No, there was no support at all. Just police taking me back to my mum to get a clip round the ear, kind of. So that wasn't really a deterrent, and if anything, that made things worse. If I remember rightly, that's all the consequences were. The police just took me back home. I was so young. They just took me back home, and then that was it. Kind of like, so there were no consequences at all. So when there isn't any consequences, especially at that age, you think, oh, I'll carry on doing it then. There's like no consequences to that. So
yeah, exactly.
it's different now because this was like late 80s. So I'm hoping it's different now. But yeah, at that time, there was no support.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, unfortunately, I don't know that it is any different now. If anything, services, I think, have been retracted even further. We've had 12 years of austerity, and I think drug and alcohol services have been particularly badly hit through that process in this country. I'm just really interested though, do you think, are there points that you look back and think, at this moment I could have chose a different path? Are there those sort of moments where you feel there could have been some intervention?
I think so. When I was placed into foster care at the age of 10, so I think that could have been my intervention, but I was rebellious, against social services, which meant then I was rebellious against foster parents and children's homes. Yeah, that's kind of partly on me as well, but there was nothing then around, any counselling, any CBT or anything at that point in time. Nothing like that was offered to me. So maybe that would have helped at the time if I had that combined with the support of foster parents and stuff. But because it was just like, there you go, you're with foster parents, that's kind of it, with no added support or anything to deal with that trauma of being, abandoned by your parents, then like it's just going to be kind of rebelling against everybody. And yeah, I think in that, from the age of 10 to 17, I was in the care system. So I was moved around the country like 15, 16 different foster parents.
Gosh.
So yeah, not very settled at all.
Yeah, that's a really difficult childhood, I think, to manage. I hear the statistic that 70% of theft is committed by individuals who have some form of substance misuse addiction, so Class A drugs, heroin. Does that ring true for you? Was that very much the sort of, the people that you were associating with at the time?
Yeah, it is. I think though, like you get to a point with obviously shoplifting as an addict and you're shoplifting in your like kind of local area, you get to a point of where you're known by every shop staff, you're known by every store detective or security in that area. So it is very much like cat and mouse, and you have to try and, so you get to a point of where then you have to progress to kind of like burglary, like either it's commercial burglary or dwelling, either way. You kind of progress that, and that's where I kind of suppose that's where mine led from shoplifting to then progress into burglary and that kind of crime, really.
That's really interesting because we often hear shop theft is a gateway crime, and people debate this quite hotly as to whether, people who steal from shops and just remain stealing from shops, or whether there is that progression. Okay, and so yours was very much the progression.
With Class A addiction like that, there is definitely that progression, you know. It was for me, and it has been for a lot of people that I used to associate with in that kind of in that thing. So yeah, I do see it as a gateway, really.
Okay. And so that was very much because, suddenly your face is known all over town. It's almost impossible to
Yeah.
then
And
steal.
I suppose as well is because I know it's really bad to say, but you see with shoplifting, it takes a lot to earn a lot of money. You know, you might have to be shoplifting pretty much consistently throughout the day to fund your habit. But with burglary, it's higher value in one go, and you don't. Do you see what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, yeah, I'm interested in those figures. So, I mean, what is the value of how much you would need to steal from the shops every day in order to fund a heroin addiction?
yeah, it depends on your drug use. With heroin use, it's not as bad because you don't have to use as much. It's the crack, really, that's the one that's really kind of like you're constantly chasing that high throughout the day. With the heroin, as long as it takes you out of withdrawals and keeps you kind of stable in that way, then you use a lot less heroin than you do crack. But in the height of my addiction, I'd be using between £400 to £500 worth of drugs a day. So
Gosh, a day. Okay. And
yeah, in a
then,
day, yeah, 400 to 500 a day. So, and that's in the height of it when I was really entrenched. So,
I mean, so doing the maths, I mean, so the things you steal, you're probably getting what, a third to half of the retail
yeah,
value.
a general rule of thumb is a third of the retail price.
So you'd be stealing around £1,500 a day,
Yes,
and that's 7 days a week.
yes.
Gosh, okay,
So
wow,
that's a lot, and that's why, as we said a minute ago about the progression as well, is like that's why you progress because that's a lot of shoplifting in a day. It's a lot of goods to be stealing in an area that you're known very, very well. So, you know, that's why people progress onto kind of crimes where you get higher value in a shorter space of time, I suppose.
I mean that is a full-time job of stealing,
Yes,
isn't it? And then
it
using, and
is.
then getting up the next day, repeat.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
what would you steal? What were the sort of go-to items?
Various items really, but a lot of the time it would be I'd get orders from people. So could be baby clothes, perfume, anything. Literally, there was one woman that she used to buy big bars of chocolate for £1 each. So like, and you'd go and steal 40 or 50 of those. That's your fix in the morning, and then you're back out again. So it could range from anything, really. It could be anything that people want.
And who's placing the orders? Is this other shops? Is it individuals, friends?
A mixture of all of it, really. It's people in pubs, people who are shop owners themselves, it's just people randomly that you just ask in the street. You'd be surprised in society how many people do actually buy stolen goods. It's quite surprising, really. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I do want, yeah, I mean, it carries a heavier sentence than shop theft handling stolen goods.
yeah,
And I
it
think
does.
people don't
But
actually realise that when
no,
they're turning a blind eye to where something's come from. One thing that, people are talking a lot about the cost of living crisis at the moment, and that's encouraging everyday people who previously wouldn't dream of stealing to suddenly start taking groceries to put food on the table, etc. Now, I wonder if it's a bit more complicated than that. And I worry sometimes that we're criminalising poor people and suggesting that they're the ones that are stealing. I wonder if perhaps they might be more willing to turn a blind eye to buying stolen goods than they would be to actually steal. I don't know if you have any sort of information on, is this cost of living driving people to steal?
I don't know. I don't think so, really. Maybe there might be, but there's food banks, you know, there's people out there to support people with the cost of living. So, you know, I just think there's been a rise maybe in drug addiction, maybe, and then that's increasing figures in terms of the shop theft, and people are thinking it's attributed to the cost of living because it's happening now and it increases now. So, um, you know, only time would tell though with the stats, you know, because that's what we're looking for, isn't it? We're looking for those individualized stats from services like ourselves and from the police.
Yeah, exactly.
But my opinion is at the minute, I think it's just attributed to other things, really.
Yeah, definitely. As you say, yeah, I think time will tell. But there is food banks and etc. And some of the people I talk to say, they're taking the difficult decision not to heat their homes or to not shower every day to save
exactly.
money rather than be driven to steal.
Exactly.
So some people are saying there is an epidemic of shop theft at the moment. So the police recorded crime is a bit of a joke. I think it's widely acknowledged because shops are simply not reporting anymore because it takes too long. The police don't turn up. And so the police in this country, I think, recorded around 300,000 incidents of theft last year. Some of the big four supermarkets are saying they alone have had over 2.5 million incidents of theft in 1 year. This is really sort of gathering pace. And what's the answer? I mean, I'm a criminologist and I'm scratching my head. I don't know how we tackle this because there's almost been, I don't know, is there almost a acceptance of theft now? You work with individuals who have been prolific thieves. What would you suggest needs to be done?
I think more services like ours, really, that really start looking at kind of like those traumas, those real reasons why people offend, and work on those holistically, as well as, getting them the foundations they need with housing and mental health support. And, it's got to be a combined thing where everything's dealt with at the same time, and having that support from people with lived experience as well to open those doors and open those conversations with those people. I think that's the only real answer that I have. And at source as well, is making it more difficult for people to shoplift, in those shops. Do you see what I mean? You got to do it at both ends.
Yeah.
So you got to, I think it's got to be a mixture of those things.
Yeah. What makes it harder? So are we talking about tags? Is it alarms? Is it security guards? What would put you off somewhere? Cast your mind back. What would make you think, oh, I'm not going in that store. It's too risky.
A very busy staff presence, really. So like places like Curry's, PC World, where it's open plan, there's a lot of staff mingling around. There's loads of cameras. I think with Curry's and places like that, it's because it's so open planned. There's no hiding spots in there.
Yeah. Okay.
Really, not really. Whereas other shops, there's like blind spots where you can go and steal like your items, and obviously, I think there's other things that the shops can do to kind of prevent or deter people from shoplifting in those shops.
I saw Waitrose have recently been publicising some of the issues that they've been having, and they said one of their strategies is that they kill people with kindness. And so rather than accuse anybody, they would approach everyone. Do you need a basket? Are you looking for something, sir? Just to say, look, I've got eyes on you. Would that deter somebody, do you think?
Yeah, that would deter. Yeah, I think it would.
Yeah.
They'll just move on to another shop, more than likely, but at least it's out of that shop.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned trauma, and I just want to go back to that because I think it's really important. So Fresh Start use a trauma-informed approach to rehabilitation. Now, not all of our listeners will be familiar with what that means. Can you just give us an overview of what that means and why is it important?
So we look at the reasons why people commit offences. So they could have suffered, like I did, I suppose, with those abandonment issues at a very young age, So within our assessment process, we're looking at those, seeing if they have any traumatic events throughout their life that they feel is an attribution to their offending or their drug use or anything like that. So we then refer into the relevant pathways that can support with that. So whether it's through Mind, NSFT, or in our area, the NHS service in our area for mental health support. So we really want to pick apart the reasons why people are offending. That's what we want to try and do. So we can put things in place and how they can cope with those things without leading to crime again. So I think, with the stats that we provide and that we've got at the moment, that it is working. Our model does work.
That's fantastic. And absolutely, you're looking at the root causes of offending in a way that, I looked at some of the prison sentences that prolific thieves will get. And, we're talking like 21 days, 3 weeks in prison. So, the idea that anything effective, you've got no programs that you're able to access, you won't have detox, you're not getting any support. So I think organisations like yours that actually say, hang on a minute, let's actually look at the reasons that this person is committing offences is so important.
It is. I think that's the most important thing. I know obviously, having someone housed and getting the right level of support in other areas as well is important. But I mean, being able to deal with those issues at the root cause is going to ensure that everything else will work. If you haven't got those root issues dealt with or being managed, then you won't be successful in your supported housing. You won't be successful with engaging with probation or engaging with your license conditions. Do you see what I mean? So that's why we use this model where we try and support with that trauma and support with everything else as well.
Yeah.
We want to try and get this more into the prisons where we're dealing with those prisoners prior to release a bit more around the trauma-informed stuff. That's something that we're looking at to increase on this year. Obviously, it's about resources and about, funding and stuff for organisations like us.
How are you funded? Where are you getting your resources from? Because, you were just 2 guys in prison that thought, hang on, we need to set up a service here. So how have you managed to access that support?
We're currently lottery funded at the moment. That's for the running of a very small team. So, with staffing wise, in terms of direct support for beneficiaries is 5. So there's 5 support workers, and the amount of support hours that goes into those clients, there's a lot of support hours in the week. So for us to grow and expand, we need additional resources to be able to do that. So, and that's part of my role, is to kind of source those funds and those funding opportunities to expand and grow the charity, really. But
yeah, and it's a really challenging landscape, I think, at the moment for resources.
It is.
Just one last question. So you mentioned that you first went to prison when you were 18, and I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the person sentencing you, the magistrate or the judge. What sentence or what do you think they should have done?
I suppose, like we said, is to try and deal with those traumas. I think back then, I don't know. It's a hard one, really, because I was really bad. I'm not going to lie. I was really badly behaved, obviously. At the time, there was no remorse, nothing really. I was just caught in that addiction, the start of my addiction as well, where at the time it was all fun and games and there was no kind of deterrent for me. So if there was anything like there is now in terms of services that provide that trauma informed approach and really deal with those issues that clearly I had with dealing, trauma from a young age, giving me that opportunity and giving me that kind of intervention may have stopped me then spending the next 14 years in and out of custody. So yeah, I think that really.
Yeah.
I think that's if I'm honest, I think that's the only thing that probably would have worked for me. Yeah. So I think over the years I've had to do it kind of myself whilst in custody, having, bits of counselling when I could whilst I've been in prison, really doing a lot of self-reflection. But it's taken a lot longer. It took 14 years of doing it for me to realise that I'd had enough and it wasn't really, I need to grow up and I need to really sort my life out. So it took me quite a long time to do that. So
wow. Thank you for sharing your story. It's been so insightful and it's so inspiring, and the organisation just sounds absolutely fantastic. We'll put all the details of that in the notes of the podcast so that people can access more information and look up all the fantastic work that you're doing.
Thank you for inviting me onto the podcast, and it's been really good to kind of share those experiences with other people. So thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.